recording.
Okay. Time is now 7 o'clock on June 24th, Monday night, 2013, 7 o'clock. We will open the Canby Planning Commission meeting. We have today simple work session. We have a work session to consider the punishment of my son for amending the annexation ordinance. Okay, we only have three commissioners here today, 3 out of 6, so I'm not entirely sure that could we actually do business in general. We could have a
Technically,
we couldn't do official business.
technically we can't, I don't believe.
We don't have quorum.
There's someone at the door.
There may be somebody coming in that
That's
will
Sean.
change that.
Yeah, we would need at least.
Well, you got, now we have a quorum.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got our quorum coming.
Because we need, basically we need 3 votes at any given time. Yeah, no, you could, yeah,
No, we have 3
you
votes.
do. But we wouldn't have 4 out of 7. We need 4 out of 7 people attending
You just,
and 3 votes to be a majority, because 2 out of 4 wouldn't be a majority. So you would need 3 votes at least, even if you had a small attendance. Mr. Hensley,
Good evening,
hello
gentlemen.
there, sir.
Good evening, Angie. How are you?
Good evening.
We just opened up.
Good.
So Brian, do you want to
Yeah.
give us a recap
I'll
then
just-
on what you put together in the
yeah,
intro?
I'll do that real quick. We introduced this topic on the May 3rd agenda, and you directed staff to bring it back for a little more in-depth discussion. And at that time, we indicated that a few months ago, staff was approached by a property owner that had a 0.87 acre tract that was down south on South Ivy at the edge of the city limits, just below Hope Village, who was interested in annexing, and as soon as he discovered and was advised of the development concept plan requirement that and what that consisted of, and the fact that it involved a much larger area that he would have to consider this concept plan on than his own property, it became pretty evident to him that this was going to be beyond his means to try to handle that requirement. That, along with the fact that I've visited with several people over the past 4 years that have also encountered some difficulties in the annexation process related to the development concept plan requirement, made me put this item on your agenda so that you would then be aware of this issue, so that maybe we could explore and look into what we might be able to do in an interim fashion, or something that we might be able to do that would somehow address this requirement, at least maybe for some property owners, potentially the smaller property owners or such. Although I want to make it known that even larger property owners could potentially have trouble with this development concept plan requirement. I wasn't here when this ordinance was passed, but just from reading a few things about it, and at the time, times have changed, as you all know. What was going on in 2006 and 2007 when Canby was at one of its most rapid growth rates, and there were lots of annexations and subdivisions being approved and activity going on. Then we go into the recession. Well, this ordinance was passed in 2008 with efforts probably starting in 2006 to develop it. And so the idea of placing some, I don't want to necessarily use the word restrictions, but placing some parameters on how annexations were done seemed very appropriate at the time, partly because we have large areas within our urban growth boundary that are intended to be urbanized that aren't planned out in any manner. And the council had indicated through this adoption process that they did not like the piecemeal effect of individual less than 1 acre tracts coming in at a time, because they weren't taking into account, they were focusing on their acre or less and not taking into account what might be best when all of the other subsequent properties around them came in, and how they might need to be served by infrastructure needs in an overall concept plan. And so the emphasis of this development concept requirement is really related to infrastructure planning. It's concentrated on the water and the sewer and the stormwater needs and the overall street circulation needs. And they threw in parks as well, because generally when you end up subdividing and developing property, our ordinances have a requirement for park dedication or SDC collection in lieu of that dedication. So those are the primary things that the development concept plan focus on. And one of the weakness in applying it, when a couple people have tried to go through that through a year-long process, a couple things they've run into is there's multiple properties, multiple property owners, and they try to hold neighborhood meetings to get some sort of consensus among those property owners, and they find a large disparity among those people in either their interest level or in what kind of plan they think is suitable. And the best way to describe it would be that some people are just not ready to be annexed into the city. They couldn't care less about the people that are kind of interested in wanting to be annexed. So you have that tug of war going on during those neighborhood meetings. And with a concept plan, it is adopted by the city council along with setting the annexation to a vote of the people. We have to remember that all annexations are a vote of the people and can be. And that becomes a plan that is written in stone that can only be changed by the process, going through a process of trying to amend it, which is kind of similar to the original adoption. But it gives guidance so that when the next 12 individual property owners come in, they're required to follow that concept plan for infrastructure. So let's say some of these areas, just in case the copy of the ordinance that I passed out, the last page is a map, but it didn't come out in color. It's the yellow ones on this map. And so, for instance, the one down south that the most recent interested person, his name was Brian Richardson, I believe? Christensen, that's what it was. He's involved in one of the concept development areas outlined in yellow there, right next to Ivy. It's right on the edge of city limits, that involves about 64 acres. I believe, and yeah, I gave you all of my maps.
I can share.
I have the old one.
Need to make sure I was looking at the right one. Yeah, that's the right one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 64 acres, and you get a concept that, well, to serve this entire area, if it was to develop under the likely scenario that it would enter the city limits with zoning, you take this concept of what's the maximum density that it would develop it out, and so what size of water lines would be needed to serve that type of population or dwelling unit count, and then what kind of needs do you have along with sanitary sewer, since the city's in charge of sanitary sewer, and we find in this particular area, a new sewer lift station is necessary. Well, those are super expensive, and so no single property owner can afford to do those themselves. And that's one of the most difficult issues dealing with growth and development, is how do you pay for those type of improvements so that you can still have growth occur. And I can't answer that for you. I really don't know the answer. I haven't really been through that process in Oregon before. But there's a variety of methods that you can try to apply to do that. But the issue is that you get these concept plans set up saying, well, we've studied our entire sanitary sewer system and we know that this is the ideal location somewhere in this area for the sanitary lift station. And lo and behold, one of the property owners finds out it's right on their property. Or they find out that to serve a 63-acre area with new houses at a density that would be likely to develop, that there's going to be a road going right through two people's house. And they get a little bit nervous and upset. What they fail to totally recognize is that no one's going to force them to be annexed. They can stay there as long as they want, but this concept plan is going to rule when their property is annexed and they sell it to somebody else that does want to develop. And that's how it's supposed to work, is that you have that. And one of the other problems that we've encountered is that there's no definition of the amount of detail that's necessary in the ordinance for developing a concept plan. So we've had one set of interested annexators that went through over a year-long process and developed extremely detailed plans. And they all fell apart when they had all the neighborhood meetings because there just wasn't any consensus or anything. And they came back and we tried to regroup, and we suggested on staff to develop more conceptual plans without all the details and not try to show all the local streets and where they would be, because that's platting. That's subdividing, and that's not what this ordinance intended. It didn't intend for you to develop and show us how you were going to develop the property. It simply wanted a concept of the land use and the density. And they tried that, and that didn't work either. So I'm not sure, but I'm just making that noted that we're not really sure how to apply it in terms of how much detail should a concept plan have to it when it's adopted by the council. And so we've had 2 iterations and 2 staff opinions on what that might look like, and I was suggesting we do something a little more conceptual and not as detailed as we had somebody trying to do before.
Now, Brett, is it required if, say, a single landowner comes in, he wants to be annexed, and right now they're on a septic, and they've got a well, they're totally self-sustained. Is it required as soon as they are annexed that they shift over and that they become on city services?
Not to my knowledge. It's not until they need a permit of some sort, a development permit, that they would need to do that. If you're within a certain distance, and I always tend to forget whether it's 250 feet or 300 feet or something, and you're trying to develop, I'm sure you have to connect at that time. But I don't think there's an automatic requirement the minute you come into the city for an existing. And of course, once they do decide to connect, then they need to pay the appropriate system development charge.
That's what kind of strikes me as funny. Last time when that gentleman was in here, and the way that this thing is written currently definitely makes it sound as if you have to be on city water, city sewer, For instance, this number 4, criteria 4 on this thing, says a statement of availability, capacity, and status of existing water, sewer, drainage, transportation, park, and school facilities. I mean, it doesn't say outright you must be, but it kind of makes me think that otherwise, if they had a well and a septic, they could say, I've got a well and a septic. That's my
The thing is,
statement.
this is based upon, the annexation is always based upon the development potential of the property when it's annexed. And so if it has an existing house on it, that's not really what you're considering when you're annexing it. You are considering what the development potential is, and to do that, you have to realize that you're annexing it for urbanization purposes, which means it will be assigned the appropriate zoning district and you will develop it at that density. And therefore, considering the availability of utilities of all types is based upon that development potential, not on serving an existing house that's already on septic.
So, like, even says statement outlining the method and source of financing required to provide additional facilities.
So I think that's probably related to what I was saying, like if you need a sewer lift station or you need to extend a 12-inch water line, then this means that we're supposed to explore how is that going to happen. Is it going to be paid completely by the developer at the time he submits a development application? Or is it going to be something that needs to be shared through an advanced financing district so that when other property owners tie on, they have to pay the developer back? That's another mechanism.
See, to me, this is perfectly fine. I don't really see any big problems with this for a developer. If we have some developer that wants to come in, is going to put in, some subdivision or do something big, that's fine. They're going to have attorneys. They're going to have planners that can go in and do all that stuff. To me, the problem is that we're basically, the way that our code sets, and that guy was the perfect walking example of it, we're preventing the ability for one parcel at a time annexation. So therefore, all of our annexations would then be a part of a giant development. And so we basically, I think if you looked at it over time, you would have concentric circles of giant developments growing on the outside edges, of the city. If you went in if that kind of a plan was in place for 100 years, it would seem that the only thing that could ever happen would be large-scale developments right on the outskirts of the city, and then the next one, the next one, the next one, if you were to expand out. Otherwise, because you couldn't have single or even two parcels at a time from mom and pop that want to annex themselves into the city, and you're stuck with only giant.
And if you think about it, from what I had read during the period they were trying to annex it, they were concerned about piecemeal annexations. And so maybe that is the weakness here, is they did a pretty good job of preventing piecemeal annexations by the adoption of this code the way it's written. Now, another thing that I'd like to emphasize that in my thought processes about this, and somewhat of my hesitation to just delete it, is because there was so much work that went into the creation of this. I mean, there was massive meetings and public input, and the people at that time in 2008 when it was adopted, the council and the citizens that participated, and if I don't know if you're aware, but most annexations were being denied by the voters back then. More recently, they've all been approved. But there was a real concern about this then. And one of the things that, in my mind, and I've talked with the city administrator about this, and he's in agreement with me, is that if the city was successful, and we've been attempting for years to complete our own master planning of these areas and adoption of those master plans, such as the Northeast Canby Master Plan, which is the area up in this one right here, this whole area here. We have a draft plan. It's been on the almost adopted about 4 years ago. But it had a problem, and ODOT didn't approve of its adoption because it resulted in increased intensity of use if we adopted the plan over time that would result in a failing intersection at Sequoia 99E. So ODOT disapproved it. Well, we got our transportation system plan adopted, and in that adoption process, ODOT said, okay, and now you need to go back and amend your Northeast Canby master plan and the zoning that's within it, and you'll be okay, and we'll bless your adoption of your plan. So we're trying to work on new neighborhood meetings right now in that area so we can get that plan adopted. But if you think of all these yellow areas for development concept plans, if we could master plan those areas as a city and get those plans adopted through your review and the council's adoption, then we would have the equivalent of what we're asking in the annexation ordinance, the developers or annexers to do in the concept planning. Our trouble is the city did not have the wherewithal or ability to do this. And that's why this ordinance, I believe, got adopted, because it places the burden on the development community rather than the city. Not that the city doesn't want to do it, and we've been trying to do it for many, many years. I've been told that on the North Redwood area that's showing on here, that's all out in the county, that the city staff's tried 3 times to get a master plan adopted. And just as I said down south when developers were trying to do it, actually it was Hope Village that was working on that one, but they hired professionals to help them with the process, and it fell apart because of the disparity among all the property owners. And staff had the same problems. And so since I've been here, every year we've been applying for grants to try to get consultants to help us to be, actually, it's a common practice to set staff away from it a bit so that you have some protection, basically, when you're dealing with these contentious issues that seem to be unresolvable with all the people and property owners that are involved. But I just wanted you to know that that's been a #1 priority of the city, to try to get these plans done and in place, but they take a tremendous amount of funds and an inordinate amount of time to get them done. But we're still working towards that goal the best that we can.
So I would assume that nothing has changed from a funding point of view from the city. In fact, that's probably even more precarious.
Yeah, because the availability of grants has gotten less every year, and now they're at their lowest point ever. City funds are at pretty much their lowest point since I've been here in 4 years. And so, although we're making progress on at least one of these, the Northeast Canby, we should be. The other related thing is what we are being successful in making progress on is working on individual infrastructure master plans. For instance, we're currently working on over a $100,000 project to complete, and nearly done, with the stormwater master plan for the entire city. And so that's one of the items that's in this concept development plan, is to do a stormwater do a concept plan for that 65 acres or whatever it is, dealing with each of these infrastructures. Well, we're going to have a master stormwater plan done, and if you think about it, that is taken into account what's going to develop in this undeveloped area based upon the projected comprehensive plans, land use for it, and what zoning it would take on when it comes into the city. And so whether it's at the same level of detail is the only question that we would get from the development concept plan process through annexation that we're getting through the overall city master plan. And it could be adequate, that you don't need to study that on these individual basis if we have these up-to-date master plans. So our problem now is that we don't have an up-to-date sanitary sewer master plan. It's 1999 vintage. It's not adequate. That's why we need the developer to do the concept plans right now, because we don't have an up-to-date master plan for the city. And the same was true of the stormwater plan that hopefully is going to be done and adopted just in a couple months or so. If we can get all of our master plans up to date for sewer and water, and Canby Utility has completed one in 2010 for water for the city, then that lessens the need for this requirement in my mind as well. And so I'm just letting you know that over time, I think this requirement will become obsolete and we won't need it anymore, because our master planning that the city does by individual utilities and by overall land use master planning will eliminate the need for this. But until we do that, I'm kind of hesitant to say or recommend that we should just throw this out right now. And so that's kind of where I'm at with it, is maybe there is something we can do to tweak it to aim specifically at this smaller properties coming in or something. That, and I haven't thought of how we would do that yet. One idea that Chair Smith had when we introduced this was, is there something we can tailor on the exception provision that's on the very last part of this ordinance? Right now it's written very broadly, and it allows, well, I don't know, you have to look at the language yourself. It says something about that we should make findings that indicate the basis for granting exceptions. Well, it doesn't give any parameters what those exceptions might be, so you could conceivably create an exception for anything you wanted, and if you get enough votes, you could accept everybody. And we've had Hope Village went through the exception process twice, and they were successful. Other people, I'm trying to remember if that's Alan. It is Alan. I did recognize your face. Alan's in the audience. I think he was one of the other ones about 4 years ago up north on Redwood that tried to go through this process. And I don't think he attempted to go through the exception process. May not have been successful, not having the same entity or name value that Hope Village had in the community, and the certainty of how it would be developed that they had. And that's why the council said they granted the exception, is that they knew what they were getting. And, you know, it wasn't a question of whether it was going to be an apartment building or something else. They knew what they were getting.
Right.
We've got two guests. Why don't we have the commissioners? You guys have any opening comments? And I want to ask the two gentlemen that came from the audience after we talk about it a little bit more if they've got input. I'm guessing they must, since they're here on a work session.
I don't have a comment, but I do have a question going back to this, your comments on Redwood. I'm just curious. My understanding is that part of this on Redwood, now I don't know if it's just the street or the property itself, properties themselves. One side is in the city of Canby, the other is county property. Is that correct?
Right. That's right.
So is this area right here, is this what we're talking about right there?
Right.
So this is actually county property at this time?
It's all county property, and it's all been defined by the adoption of this map with the annexation ordinance to be a development concept area, so that any property that's in the county now, and that's also in the urban growth boundary,
Okay.
so that it's understood when it was added to the urban growth boundary that it's ready to be urbanized whenever someone wants to annex and is successful in getting it annexed, which can be thwarted at any moment by the vote of the people. And that's not, it's much more common now across the state to have, you know, voter-approved annexations. It's still not the norm. It's definitely still the minority of cities that have that.
I've been on here since 2007, so I remember going through some of this stuff, especially up here off of Redwood and stuff, and there was a plan for development, and it was all laid out and everything, and then nothing ever come of it that I know of. And maybe that's what he was involved in. And I think the reason why a lot of this was accepted and at the time and everything was because of the great amount of annexation to build these big plots and stuff, and people were wanted to keep the town smaller and not growing. And so that was the reason why a lot of that was adopted then and everything, because I was on at that time. But I see, like we were talking here, that for a little private or one person, we ought to make it somewhat easier, or, you know, if he wants to just annex into the city, but if anything was developed after that or into a group, then I think that it should be part of the overall picture. But for like less than an acre, I don't see why, you know, he has to go through all this other stuff just to annex into the city. I'm in favor of, you know, figuring out another way, making exceptions. And when I was reading this and exceptions in here, you know, we could lay some groundwork for exceptions, I think, to accommodate some of these people with the small annexations.
Mr. Hensley, your thoughts?
I agree with that. I mean, there needs to be some kind of exception. It's still going to have to go through a process to get it developed in the first place. So really, they're going to have to do the legwork on either side. You're going to have to do it to begin with, which is what we're requiring them to do. But like in this example, trying to get everybody in this large of a group of property to agree on one thing it's never going to happen. And I can see the frustration on Mr. Christensen's part. I mean, he's got to try and pull these people together, and then he's got to fund it also. So I think we definitely need to come up with some kind of language, and it could be in that exception piece, just adding in there some groundwork that we can get around this and make it to where people can bring this in. They're still going to have to go through the development process anyways.
Yeah, they're developed, but if there's already a property, I mean a house or something, and he just wants to annex it into it, I think, you know, we could make exception there, but probably it should go through a vote, but
The
not
thing-
have to go through.
Thing too that always concerns me, anytime you do something like a development concept area and you cast in, definitely it's not in stone, but you put a framework around, says this area is going to be this kind of development. Even though it's not currently that kind of development, nobody's currently pushing for it to be that kind of development, but somebody, you know, trying to derive from a crystal ball saying this would be good out there. If that's not accurate in the first instance, and now you've got this development concept area for the area, and you've got one or two or people don't agree on it, you may be deadlocked forever. And that development concept area may prohibit anything from taking place out there because it's slightly different now because 20 years has passed since it was put into place. People don't see eye to eye on it, but that it's either that development concept or get them to come in and amend that development concept that they may not even want in the first place. It could, if you lean too far to that way of doing it through master planning, then you're going to lock yourself out of any flexibility. If you don't at least leave yourself some provisions for flexibility.
I might mention, just in the terms of this, the way it works, it becomes somewhat political in nature in that you hold these neighborhood meetings with all the property owners in the development concept plan, and you have all this disagreement, and so the people that want to annex get really nervous about moving forward, even if they have a solid concept plan. And the way it's set up, they can go to the council, and if they can get the council to agree that they have a viable, solid concept plan that's logical and makes sense for development of the area, the council can still approve it if every single person in the audience is against it. And it's set up that way. But what's the chance that they will do that? And that's what the problem has become, is if they don't at least get half the property owners in agreement, it's not likely they're going to get the support at the council meeting because of all the people in the audience that are telling them, no, don't approve this. So that's the practicality if they were to carry it on through and get to the council meetings that I believe that they're worried about, is that they see in their neighborhood meetings they're just not getting the consensus, and it's going to be a free-for-all when it's at the public hearing in front of the council.
Do you have any idea how much it costs for the election of an annexation? It does say in here that the applicant has to pay for it. Is that by itself self-prohibiting, that nobody would ever do it on their own?
That can, but there are ways for that to be lessened, and the ordinance kind of addresses that. If you try to annex just once a year in the November general election, it generally doesn't cost you much because there's other, I don't know how it works, I can't explain it, but there's other ballots that the county's already setting up or something, and so if you try to do it in the off seasons, which is still possible, or a special election, you're paying the total cost that involved with the county to set it up, which are thousands and thousands of dollars. And also, if there's other measures on the ballot, which there usually is in November, then they divide it equally among everybody, what there is to pay or something. And so it makes it less. And so it's really hard to answer your question.
That's what's true.
'Cause
There was a
Yeah, it
particular
varies.
charge for annexations.
Yeah,
that
they do, the ordinance basically just says that you give us a deposit, is $2,500, and we start charging any expenses the city has so that it doesn't cost the city anything for somebody to try to annex property. And then if we have to bill you more than that $2,500, we will. If we don't use it all, we'll refund it. And the last couple of them have not quite used the full deposits.
Okay.
So we've refunded part of that.
Sir, did you have any thoughts? What's your name?
I would like to talk a little and maybe answer some questions if anybody has. My name's Alan Manuel. I'm a local realtor. Used to be a developer before we got the DCPs. I live at 31150 South Needy Road. My office is at 489 Southwest 1st in Canby. I'm the person who spearheaded all of this work on North Redwood. I started in 1999 with my first annexation request. It's failed 3 times. I have about $30,000 of personal money in those annexation requests, and I'm no better off than I was in 1999. Other folks who have allied with me to try to meet these DCP requirements have another $30,000 in it, so we have whiffed $60,000 and gotten nowhere. The only people I think that could put together a program in one of the DCPs, I think, would be a major outside developer. Somebody with national clout that had national money that could come up and buy up essentially all the land, and then they could put a project together. So basically, as I see it, the DCPs have cut local developers out of the development process in the city of Canby. What that practically has meant is that the only people who can annex are people who are not in a DCP. So in fact, you are forcing piecemeal annexation because that's all that's available to annex because of the city's failure to provide leadership in the DCP area. The DCP concept is a good concept, but there's nobody to lead the charge. And I think we have shown on the North Redwood project that private local leadership of the charge simply is not going to work. I mean, we have beautiful plans, we lay it all out for the city, and really what the city told us the last time was that we really have no way of approving this. We don't know what the standards are. but we still require you to do it. About that time, the bottom fell out of the real estate market, and so the project was dropped. But you can go to the city right now and ask, what are the standards for developing a development concept plan for this specific group of land in the city? As far as I know, will not be able to tell you. It's a very fuzzy concept. And unless a big outside developer is going to do it, the only people I think that can successfully lead the charge is the city staff. Unfortunately, there is one, no money, and two, no motivation for the staff to do it. It is not urgent for them like it's urgent for somebody who would like to do something with his property, you know, hopefully before he dies. The timing of annexation elections, and staff alluded to it, is very important because it has to do with what the electorate is thinking. We have proposed and paid for and been through 3 annexation attempts on Redwood with the land that we control. Various pieces at different, I mean, one piece every time, but different amounts of land in control at different times. And we've never even gotten close to getting annexed. Now the annexations are going through, but we're faced with a DCP program that forbids us from doing annexation until somehow somebody's going to magically generate this plan that there are no standards to develop.
So do you have a DCP recorded on your property right now, on that Redwood, whatever it's called?
I'm inside the square. There's nothing recorded on it, but we're inside the one square on the east side of North Redwood.
So so it's not recorded as a covenant then, are you, is that right?
I don't think it's recorded. Those aren't recorded, they're just
Well,
lines
they
on the
would
city.
be, though. I mean, there's a requirement in the annexation ordinance that they be, I forget what it says now.
If you had a DCP, it would be recorded.
Yeah.
If there was a plan, all we have is a box. If we had a plan, if somebody wanted to impose a plan on us for development, we would be happy campers. We'd go do it.
Okay, so you're in a box, but there's no substance to what you're
There's no
supposed to have in that
substance.
box.
And there are no rules for how to develop that substance, and there's no leadership. And we have spent money and effort far beyond what a citizen ought to have to do to try to get a piece of land annexed, and we can't even get started. And nobody can tell us how to get started. The city has done well in getting industrial land annexed and developed in the city, and we're generating jobs a little. I'm sure you folks are aware of how many building lots there are in the city of Canby. It's enough if you're in a severe depression, but when the city of Canby gets to moving and developing it takes 300, 400 lots a year. There might be, 50 in town right now, and none in the pipeline, and none being able to put in the pipeline, because most of the land is tied up in DCPs. If you're looking for a middle ground, something that I would be happy with, that would just give me some guidance in how to proceed, is to allow annexation but not development inside DCPs until the plan was developed. You might ask why I would want to do that, and that's because I think we're in an environment now where we could be annexed, the voters would approve it. At times in the past, 04, 06, 07, there was nothing anybody could do to get annexed. No, it wouldn't have mattered. They could have had the finest DCP plan that was ever developed, and the voters wouldn't have even looked at it. They just voted it down. That's not the case now. So you need some flexibility in getting land inside the city.
So, sorry, let me ask you another question. Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to acknowledge is key on this. So is your understanding the DCP applies to you in your property even though the annexation got turned down?
Yes. Because if I walk into the city planning office and say I want to annex, they tell me you can't do that because there's not a developed DCP on that land and yours land is inside this box.
It would seem to me that the DCP only should move forward and be binding upon successful annexation. Otherwise, it should evaporate.
Right.
That's what makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Okay.
He's never gotten in front of the council to try to get his DCP adopted. He stopped just short of trying to do that.
Okay.
And so, although I agree with everything Alan's saying, just to take it a step further, is yes, there's no certainty on what a DCP should look like. And so we can't communicate that. But on the other hand, there's no reason to believe that whatever they propose couldn't potentially be approved by the council, because there's no standard or level of detail. And so as long as it's something that's reasonable and staff thinks it has some reasonable to it, put it in front of the council and try to get it adopted.
So right now, we don't know if a chicken scratch on a piece of paper would pass or a 100-page report by the best,
Right.
land use planners in the
What
world.
we do know is the program is 10 years old and there are no approvals.
Okay.
That speaks a lot in of itself.
Sure. Just trying to get land.
And, it's not a challenge of are there road services, are there sewer services, are there water services, at least in the North Redwood situation. All of that stuff is there. Stormwater program is available. There's just nothing to stop it. And we're not looking, almost all of the land is in 5 acres. It was originally platted as 5 acres, East Canby Gardens. So there's some 2.5s, but there's some 10s, but it's mostly 5-acre pieces. And those pieces, reasonable planners can develop them without screwing it up.
So let me understand if, from your perspective, am I encapsulating your concerns, I guess, in a roughly accurate way, is that in order to move forward as a developer like you guys would be, your concern is you don't have enough knowledge about what would be required and what might be approvable for you to want to take the financial risk to go and present it. Is that somewhat accurate? Because you don't know if you'd even be close?
I wouldn't say that's the case. I would say that we would expect failure, as we found in the past, because the city doesn't know what they want, and there's no leadership from the city on providing what they want. It can't be that hard for the city to say what's supposed to be in these development concept plans. But 10 years in, they have not said that. It really leaves us in a baffling situation. What I would like to do right now, with 5 acres I have on North Redwood, is walk into the Planning Commission, file an annexation request, receive a reasonable hearing and a fair vote from the people. That's what I'd like to do. And, if the city's got a master plan they want me to abide by, I'll meet your traffic requirements, I'll meet your storm sewer requirements, I'll meet your sanitary sewer requirements, circulation requirements. We'll meet all of those. And that's really, how it's worked before we got into this development concept plan thing. If there was no storm sewer available, either the developer made it available or didn't develop. Pretty simple. But it doesn't matter right now, even on North Redwood, all those storm sewer, water, all of that stuff is available. Access is good, if not great. We still can't develop.
Okay.
We can't even start the discussion because we're to such a frustrating point.
Let me ask the other gentleman here if he's got some comments. Sir, were you planning to make some comments today? Would you like to get involved in this?
I would, but I'm not well versed. I thought it was going to be on TV, so I wasn't
Oh,
prepared.
okay. we're not going to go for forever tonight, so I just wanted to give you a chance before we. Okay. Mr. Manuel, any other, we may just, if you want to just sit there while we talk, we may want
That's
to ask you
fine.
questions or things. You don't have to, not formal
That's fine.
presentation today. Why don't we open it back up and just discuss, any bright ideas come on any method on moving forward on this?
Well, like you, I hate being in in situations where ambiguity rules and you don't know the rules of engagement, so to speak. That'd be terribly frustrating. I particularly think that it's incumbent upon the city to develop, at least some basic rules for you to follow. And so it surprises me that isn't even in place. So that would be, and I don't know where to go with that. I get this wave of frustration coming from him, and just kind of going, well, if you've been waiting well over 10 years, obviously, you would have hoped that there was some progress.
I would think the DCP thing needs to be suspended and until the city can provide leadership and a way to develop plans.
When I look at this, there are a number of pieces to this that sort of stick out like a sore thumb, as if there was some editing that didn't get proofread well. And number two, if you notice, the very last sentence just does not fit in with the rest of the thing at all. It simply says, a supply of developable residential land to provide for the anticipated population growth over the following 3 years is considered to be sufficient. But there's nothing that talks about residential, how much is the supply, what quantity of supply, why just residential? Why does that assume that it will be only residential? Until I don't think that particular sentence was put in there.
There's actually been some, what would you call them, policy interpretations that have been brought to the council that have clarified for staff in implementing this, something to the effect that a 3-year supply of residential dwelling units is considered adequate, and I think it was based upon platted lots. I don't remember the detail now, it's been so long since we've dealt with that, but it's been clarified, I guess, as annexations have gone through the process of what they feel is an adequate supply. I think that was part of what you were reading.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't in here. So there's been that interpretation made.
My thoughts are that we clarify the language on this existing one, and then that we add a small-scale annexation provision. I was just sketching out some ideas, saying something like 2 or fewer parcels, totaling up to 5 acres or less. They must present the criteria in, Chapter 16, Section 84040, to the extent that they apply. The city shall consider and make findings and approving or denying the small-scale annexation request if the blah, 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 and then add in, if the annexation would be consistent with the existing, the existing development patterns in that area or something like that. And have a small scale, so it's like 1 or 2 lots, 5 acres or less. You can have one person and their neighbor, can come in and do this without too much of a mess.
With the way it's set up now, it's still whoever wants to annex, it has to go and be voted by the majority of the people in the city.
Right, and you do need to be aware that there's people that have an idea of what they want to do, and there's people that only want to get it annexed, and then they're just selling it. They're not planning on developing in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes that causes problems in annexations because we demand to know what the development's going to be. And so that's been a struggle, and that annexation shouldn't be talking about development. It should be talking about bringing it into the city so then you can have either them or whoever they sell it to or buys it from them that do want to develop, present a development plan. And that's a different stage than annexation. So when you annex, you merely indicate what the highest possible intensity of use could be, and you let the voters know that under the worst case scenario, you might see this many homes, or that it could develop with an office building of this magnitude.
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we're sort of duplicating the process there, double protecting. Because if, say for instance, you had, say that Mr. Brian Christensen that was out there, apparently he has a somewhat largish lot with a single house on it, on the edge of town, on Ivy somewhere. And so if he was to be annexed, and there's no requirement that he do anything right away, if he's on septic and he's on a well, he doesn't need any city services, he gets annexed, wouldn't it still kick in if he ever wanted to, say he's got 2 acres, I don't know, and he wanted to take that into 4 lots, and he was zoned residential, if he wanted to subdivide that and make 4 lots out of that and develop 3 other houses out there, then all the rest of the city requirements would kick in anyways. So for him to have to prove his development plans in advance, to me seems duplicative, because if he ever wanted to divide it or develop it, it's all going to all apply then at a later state, and he'll have to comply.
You're 100% right that it's going to, at the later stage, in the development stage, that he's going to be required, but at that stage, you're really only focusing by application and such on his property. And so you can decide, and staff has done that forever, on what's adequate to serve that property. But what hasn't occurred is that the way you get those development services to that property necessarily the best solution that's also going to serve every other one when they come in. So if you need a 12-inch water line adjacent to the edge of his property, are you going to be thinking of that, or are you only going to do this 8-inch line? And then when 6 other properties develop, you get to the end one and oops, it's not big enough. That's the only way that I can think of why this development concept plan is in here, is to not be thinking just property by property, which is how it would happen. And it works fine for property by property, but at some point there are potential issues if you don't have a master plan that tells you you're putting in the right size pipe to that property. And that's where we're suffering right now, is we haven't been able to keep our master plans up to date, and therefore we're running blind when these annexations and developments occur. Apparently that's what they were encountering when they adopted this, some feeling that we weren't adequately addressing that overall master planning component. We were only addressing each lot at a time. The bigger the lot, the more you're probably doing it okay, because if it's a 40-lot subdivision, you're thinking of those bigger issues. But if it's a smaller one, you may not be thinking of the next 3 next door when they come in. And did we do the right thing here to get services to them? And of course, we're supposed to be thinking that way. And I'm not sure that the council or whoever at the time felt that we were doing that well enough. That's my sense of why they adopted this.
Anybody else have any thoughts or commentary on this? I mean, where I'm thinking is, it seems that we have some consensus generally that we would want there to be the possibility of some small-scale annexations. To me, where I'm thinking that our momentum is going is, we would need some ideas and language to be bounced around. We don't have that yet. All we have is, what are the problems, and do we agree that we would want to solve them somehow? Is there thoughts on that?
Well, I like the theory of the annexation on its own. I mean, they should be able to annex the property in without really necessarily knowing what it's going to be. I mean, it could be just annexed in, and they're going to hold the house that's on the property, and it's going to sit there for another 20 years, and that could be the case. I don't see why. I guess I can see both sides of it. I can see why they maybe want to know this, but just like you're saying, that it's a hard road to go down. You're having to do this master plan. You're having to do all these things beforehand and know what the property is going to be in the eventual. I don't see how that can really happen when you're dealing with multiple properties and multiple owners. You know, that's the city now telling a property owner what they're going to do with their property, and I'm not necessarily in agreement with that.
If I might pitch in there.
Sure.
The key is, as staff points out, is having the master plans done, not having design concept plans for specific areas. If you do a traffic plan for the city, that applies to everybody equally.
Right.
If you do this design concept plan here, here, and here, these people are shut out and these people can proceed. It's unfair. And just in case, I have a couple of houses on Redwood that we took the city almost to court before we quit, trying to get to hook up to sewer and water because we have terrible red water and failing septic tanks. And after we'd failed twice at annexation, we did this, and we could not get a right to hook up either. But if we had an annex and no development, or annex and development's a separate stage, we could have annexed those properties and hooked them up to the sewer and had a lot better sanitary system.
All right, well, I want to